Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And this week on the show, we are talking about yet another High Republic book release, Quest for Planet X by Tessa Gratton, which is the final middle grade installment of Phase 2 of the High Republic. We're inching closer to the full end to Phase 2. We got one more after this.
It's so weird to me that Phase 2 has been only 2 waves because, like, part of me is like, wow, I have been with these characters for literally 0.2 seconds. And the other part of me is like, wow, we've been in Phase 2 forever. And I'm like trying to reconcile those two feelings. And then somebody will be like, yeah, well, Phase 1 ended at the very beginning of 2022. And I was like, wait a second. Buryaga has been question marks for over a full calendar year.
Where is he? Michael Siglain.
Honestly,
where is he?
My brain is so mush at this point with all of the High Republic. Like time doesn't exist anymore. But like, I guess we're back again, and we're gonna be back one more time before we take a break, and then we're back again. The High Republic. It just keeps High Republican. That didn't work. I tried.
I just tweeted this recently. I was like, High Republic is not just content. It is a state of mind.
Yeah. Were you following a meme format with that?
No, I'm just feeling it. It's kind of like putting the high in the High Republic, being like, yeah, man, it's a state of mind, man.
Gotcha. You know, you can also be like, it's that one, you said party. And then I thought about one party meme that's like, they don't know and it's like, they don't know I'm thinking about the High Republic. Except they probably do, I
was gonna say, like, we're at a party full of book readers, and there's a bunch of different Kool-Aid selections on the table, and we're at the punch bowl full, like, labeled High Republic, and we're just not only like, we're not like doing like the tap where you press the button and it comes out, of the Gatorade cooler, like at a college party. You are opening up the top of that Gatorade thing. You are scooping it. Drinking it by the cup.
Sometimes life just is like that,
Yeah.
and that's been us since January 2020. How are we bringing this together, Brad? You do the transitions better than me. Anyway, so we're back, and we're not at any college parties today because this is a book meant for 8 to 12-year-olds. It's interesting because I feel like I should have read this a little bit, like, when I got to the end, I was like, maybe I should have read this before Cataclysm, but also maybe not. But, they kind of exist in parallel with each other, so you can kind of go either way with them. But we got a different perspective on the Battle of Donald that I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I would say for me, this one, you would want to read either first or second. I don't think you want to read it last. Path of Vengeance and Cataclysm are like good cliffhanger endings to Phase 2, I think. They kind of like put the exclamation point on all of it, and similar to Quest for the Hidden City back in Wave 1 of Phase 2, this is like a nice fun side adventures with some really likable characters, and I'm excited to dive into some of their journeys and some of the more interesting aspects of the book that we got to kind of peel back the layers on. But before we do that, a couple things up front real quick. So in case you are not already following us on all of our socials, you should go do that. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and follow our podcast feeds wherever you're listening so that our Path of Vengeance episode, which is coming soon, hits your feed and you're ready to listen to it. So you don't want to miss it. Recently, too, we just talked about Cataclysm, which was awesome. Great episode, about almost 3 hours long.
Did we really go for almost 3 hours? I mean, you edited that, Did we really do that?
Yes, we did.
My brain, even though it is full of High Republic content, is the size of a pea sometimes. Like, I'm like, what did we do on the podcast?
We can make it from a pea to a grapefruit when we need it to.
With High Republic content details only.
It's like the Jimmy Neutron brain blast. It's just that for 3 hours. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's me when I talk about the Kazrath device. I'm sorry, You're like wanting to move on, and my brain is stuck in not.
We also had an interview with Deborah Wilson, who plays Seer Junda in the Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor video games. So you want to check that out. And we just received our advanced copies of Rise of the Red Blade by Delilah Dawson. So stay tuned for our coverage on that in the months ahead, because that is coming out next month. That's like the big release on the horizon before we get into fall season. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
But the biggest piece of news, real quick, we haven't done some news in a while. feel like Celebration happened. We had all the news. You had like a news dopamine rush, and then everything's just been quiet for a while, right?
Me, like in the file folder of my brain. Yeah.
Opens the cabinet and it throws you across the room because it just keeps opening.
Yeah.
Endlessly.
But it's also like cobwebs because like there's nothing at the front files. You know, it's been a couple months since there's been like capital N news. You know,
I left a used lollipop in here.
I've been in K-pop land. Okay, there's lots of news happening all the time there. My brain is just mush.
Well, here I am on a Sunday afternoon, sitting on my couch, turning on the Xbox showcase. I'm just like, what games are coming out? What's happening?
I didn't even know that was a thing. So you were watching the Xbox showcase, and I was like doing laundry.
And I hear the sound of a TIE fighter. I go, what the fuck? What's going on? We're getting Battlefront 3? Huh? We're not getting Battlefront 3. I know. I wish too. But Ubisoft finally announced its open world Star Wars game, and it is called Star Wars Outlaws, and it is coming out next year, 2024. Features a new character, Kay Vess, her amazing little Mercal species creature named Nyx.
He's an axolotl. He's a real world axolotl.
Yeah, and the hottest commando droid that you've ever seen in your life, named ND5.
Right. That's right. Amen to that.
I mean, we've had a assortment of droids in the past that are pretty awesome, but this one really fucks. So I am excited for ND5. But the game takes place in between Empire and Return of the Jedi, and it's about like the criminal underworld. So I'm super excited because we just got a Star Wars game, and now we're getting another Star Wars game with a new protagonist. That's so cool.
Yeah, I was like, guys, slow down. It's a random Sunday afternoon, and like I gotta work through Survivor. You know? I'm a little late to the game. You guys can't do this to me, even though it's like a full calendar year away. And I'm like, wait a second, guys. But no, it looks really good. I watched the trailer. I haven't seen, I guess there was like a 10-minute gameplay. I haven't caught that yet, but I did watch the trailer, and it's going to be interesting and dynamic. And I'm really curious to see us getting a bit more of the story before it comes out and understanding the character a bit better of Kay. So I'm looking forward to it. Happy to see it. I mean, the Star Wars video game storytelling has been really good recently. So we obviously love the Jedi stories. I am a big proponent of Battlefront 2. I have not played Squadrons, but that's purely because I cannot play flying games. Like I am so
valid
weak.
Those are tough. Yeah.
Like whenever I have to fly in Battlefront or even Star Wars Lego Star Wars, it's like, please put me out of my misery ASAP. I'm very bad at it. So
it'll be interesting though. I would die for Nyx. I just love when Star Wars is a cute little guy, and Nyx is the cutest little shit.
Little guy.
Yeah, so cute. We even had like Carbonite Han Solo in the trailers. That's really interesting. You know, speaking of criminal underworld, like will we see Kira, Crimson Dawn, like Boba Fett? You know, there's so many different possibilities within that time period. So I really find that interesting. Gameplay looks great. I'm just happy that we finally have a Star Wars game where you can start on land, fly up through the atmosphere, go into space, and go into hyperspace without any loading screens. It's just like a pure, seamless transition. It really feels like you're immersed. So that's pretty cool. I've wanted that forever.
A lot of people worked very hard on that.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's a doozy, I'm sure, from a game design perspective.
I don't know. I really admire people who design and build functioning games. It's one thing to like build a movie and then, you know, like or VFX in a movie or move together the movie or, you know, work on a movie, right? And then you like finish it and you put it out into the world, right? It's a totally different thing to like build a very, very three-dimensional, very large, complicated, linear, but also not at all linear sort of game story and have worlds that, you know, hundreds of thousands of players are walking through and be like, okay, now don't break. You know?
I am convinced every video game is held together by duct tape and glue.
I mean, I work for an app now. I work for a startup app, and it's amazing to me. Like somebody I know built an app and that many people go on it, and it's not like it functions like that it functions on a regular basis. Like that freaks me out. Like that's such a foreign language to me. I don't understand how that happens, but I really admire the fact that it does happen.
It's kind of like this podcast, you just never know. Some days it might not function and some days it might. And
no, Brad, but it functions in a very linear fashion. We plan the episode, we record the episode, you edit the episode, and we're done with it, and we put it out into the universe, and then we don't touch it again.
Yeah, but I'm more talking like Wi-Fi, tech issue. You just never know what podcasting can throw your way. You just never know.
Right. When I became the sole host of the podcast 55 minutes into our Josh Brenner interview because your Wi-Fi dropped, I was like, he never existed in the first place. Anyway,
little behind the scenes action, but we know what we do love here and what we like thrown our way is more books. And I hope that we get a Star Wars Outlaw tie-in book, because that would be great. And I think if anybody from publishing is listening to this episode, please do that, because that would be great. I think there's a huge interest for that.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Tie-ins.
If Inferno Squad and Battle Scar is any indication, people love those books.
Inferno Squad, Battle Scars,
Twilight Company.
Twilight Company is kind of a spin-off. I mean, you could even put it in a very sort of tangential category, but like the Alphabet Squadron trilogy fits into Squadrons a little bit.
You just want an excuse. No, actually, no. Shadowfall does have some crossover, because Hera
I know it does.
Squadrons to go do Shadowfall stuff. So you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
Thank you.
I'll give you that.
It wasn't like built as a tie-in, but like it.
But it is
ties in. Yeah, any excuse to talk about Alphabet Squadron, you bet.
Yeah. Well, let's tie in our independent bookstore of the week into this episode, because that's the last thing we got to hit here before we actually dive into Quest for Planet X. So Sarah, kick it off with our next bookstore of the week.
Once again, friends of the Force, we are back with an independent bookstore of the week, because you know why? Because this is a book discussion episode, and we love books here at Friends of the Force. So our bookshop of the week is the Salt Eaters Bookshop. It is a bookshop out of Inglewood, California, and they don't have an About Me page, which is one of those things. It's like, I really love, just like, tell me exactly what you want to say. But no, that they are an awesome Black-owned bookstore out in California that specializes specifically Asha Grant. She's 27, raised more than $81,000 on GoFundMe to start this bookshop in the pandemic. And it is a shop that prioritizes books, zines, and comics written and created by and about Black women, girls, femmes, and non-binary people. She specifically says her goal is to decolonize literacy, and stating that, literacy the literary world, can be an elitist, classist, and exclusionary place. And I think that, if you are just looking around at the top selling authors, right, you can kind of see how that is playing out on a daily basis. It is something that is incredibly, incredibly real. And so I think that this is a shop that has a great mission and a great space within her community. And if you can't make it to Inglewood, California, to browse the selection of books that she has in the shop, you can support them on bookshop.org. So if you go to thesalteatersbooks.com, they have a bunch of, like tabs and such things to find out about events and stuff, but also to shop online and under the books category. And anytime you shop at bookshop.org, this is a tandem plug here. Anytime you shop at bookshop.org over a place like Amazon, you are directly supporting independent bookshops. The prices are often really quite comparable. And you can pick the bookshop, or you can just donate in general, or just not pick a bookshop and it'll just go general pool. So the Salt Eaters Bookshop out of Inglewood, California is our bookshop of the week. And also shop on bookshop.org instead of Amazon if you have the ability to. That's it. I'm off the podium, unless you have anything else to add this week, Brad.
Yeah, no, I think you hit all the key points. I think it's a great bookstore, and especially during Pride Month, whether they're queer-owned bookstores or bookstores geared towards queer books themselves. That's stuff we want to highlight during this month especially. So go check them out. And if you're in California as a local, go stop in and say hello. $81,000 during the pandemic. That's That's a tall ask. It's tough to open a bookstore ever, but like especially during a pandemic, in the height of a pandemic, and raise that amount of money is nothing short of incredible. So go check them out. We'll have the link in the description of the episode as well to visit their website.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing that like the book community and like her community came together around her to support her in creating this bookshop. And I think that's, that's one of those things that like people supporting people is something that is worth doing. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a very, very human thing that I think we need to preserve in this world that I think splinters us in so many ways and puts us against each other. Anyway,
books are great. Books are great. So let's talk about one here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that transition, Brad.
For Planet X by Tessa Gratton. Here we go. Spoiler warning ahead. This book has been out for almost 2 months though, so it's a pretty quick read. You should have probably checked it out already, but if not, we're going to talk about it. And join us for this discussion because there are some awesome characters. There's some really fun things to dive into and connect the larger High Republic tapestry and fill in some spots that we haven't really been privy to during this phase. So yeah, let's get into it. Quest for Planet X. Last book that we got from Tessa Gratton was Path of Deceit, which they co-wrote with Justina Ireland. That was a great book. You and I think that might be our favorite of phase 2 thus far. Although Path of Vengeance, pretty damn good, and if I may say so.
Well, you said thus far, and I have not read Path of Vengeance yet. So
Path of Vengeance is probably my favorite personally, but both are
these
great.
YA books coming out of nowhere. I mean, obviously YA books have always been really quite good in Star Wars, but like coming out of nowhere as the favorites was maybe something that's a little bit unexpected for us within the High Republic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tessa also being a newcomer to the High Republic in phase 2. They will also be writing Defy the Storm along with Justina for phase 3, as well as
such a good title.
Temptation of the Force, which is going to be a phase 3 wave 2 headliner for Del Rey. So that's pretty awesome. I can't wait to see Tessa's take on the adult fiction within Star Wars. That's going to be exciting.
Tessa has had some pretty meaty titles to contend with. Quest for Planet X, Path of Deceit, Defy the Storm, and what is it? What's the last one?
Temptation of the Force.
Temptation of the
Summer
Force.
2024. So like this time next year, we're going to be talking about another Tessa Gratton book.
That's probably going to like murder us.
Who's being tempted? Is it Elzar Mann?
You know what? I remember Justina and Tessa. I don't know who said it, but Justina brings the killing and Tessa brings the kissing. So I to their co-written books. So I'm hoping maybe that there will be some kissing in Temptation of the Force. Maybe the Force is a little like maybe
the Force wants to fuck. I don't know. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, I respect it if it does. It's kind of just a thing, you know.
It feels like an Elzar Mann's like out of control. He's just flirting with everybody, throwing out all his one-liners that he can.
Flirting with the darkness. Ooh.
Losing his pants here and there. You never know. Temptation can cause some pants loss here and there. You gotta
stop with the
can't predict it. You can't predict when it'll happen.
You gotta stop with the pants.
If you or a loved one have been affected by Elzar Mann losing his pants, you may be entitled to financial compensation.
Our listeners are only affected by Elzar Mann losing his pants because you bring it up every other episode.
It's the funniest thing to ever happen in Star Wars. Okay, let's talk about Quest for Planet X before I go off on a tangent here. Sarah, what did you think of Quest for Planet X? How did it make you feel? Just what are your overall thoughts on this next installment here?
I enjoyed this one. It felt I didn't feel as enthusiastic about it as I have about some of our other middle grade releases, but overall it was a fun adventure. I really liked the dynamic between our characters because for me, like they each came from a really different point of view. So of course we have Rooper, we have Das who already know each other and are friends. We've got Sky who is a bit of a new character to us, but not the Graphs. Graphs are not new. And then we have Felix, who we know from Path of Deceit. And so it's a really interesting group to see come together. But I ended up really liking the ways in which they interacted with each other and the ways in which they came together for the story and for each other. So overall, it was a good read.
Yeah, I like this one a bit more than Quest for the Hidden City, which is not to any discredit of that book. I enjoyed the Catacomb and the underground cities and sort of the vampire twist within the High Republic. I thought that was all very interesting. But to your point, what I love the most about Planet X is the relationship between Rooper, Sky, and Das. And they all have very similar motivations in a way, and they come from backgrounds that they can find those commonalities. You know, Rooper is trying to impress Solandra's show and be the best Padawan she can be. Sky is trying to make a name for themselves within the Graf family by finding this planet, mapping this planet, getting the sort of quote unquote gold rush figured out. And also dealing with their brother who is on their tails at all times and navigating that relationship, but also the loss of a father. And then you have Das, whose father is alive, but Das lost his mother, and he wants to go back to Planet X to get that ship, the Silver Streak, back because it has the only remaining recording of his mother, the only holo recording that he has left. And he's also trying to not necessarily impress his dad, but like show off to his dad that he can do his thing on his own and he can be a pilot. He can be a prospector just like his dad. He doesn't need to follow his dad and do everything his dad wants to do by his dad's rules and by his dad's playbook, right? So like kind of that all three of these people, of these kids, they want independence for themselves from maybe a kind of quote unquote parental figure or somebody who is their guardian of sorts. You know what I mean? Like they all want to kind of get free of that.
So they all want independence from it, but they also want a certain amount of acceptance.
Yes.
From them as well. So I realized like 70% of this way through this book, I was like, oh my God, this is a book about parents. Like, you know, it goes, I forgot who said it initially, but somebody was like, okay, middle books are about finding how you fit in. And then YA books are like finding out how you live in, like who you are in the world kind of a thing. And I was like, oh, I think that's how they did that. But like, I realized that's like, oh, this is a book about 3, but actually 4 people, if you include Felix, which I do because Felix is a dad and like Felix is worried about his family. So Felix is providing a different perspective, but like on the same theme. This is a book about young people, attempting to find their independence in the world and be respected as an individual, but also be accepted as an individual by the people that have led them this far. And I thought that like, so I mean, there's a whole moment when Rooper's talking about like, you know, we don't have parents like, you know, you guys do. We have our masters, and our masters are like our parents. And that's why I'm trying so hard to contact Solandra. And then both, you know, Das and Sky with their dads and trying to find some closure on something with that relationship. Once I figured that out, I think the book like snapped into place for me a little bit more, if that makes sense.
And it's interesting too, because for a book called Quest for Planet X, they never actually make it to Planet X.
I was so surprised.
Which I think it's like, dang it, we didn't get there yet. Although I would say to everybody, go read Path of Vengeance because...
Stop spoiling things, Brad.
That's the only hint I'll give there. But I think with that in mind, I don't think that's a drawback of the book. I think it's sort of a flipping the expectations of the book and of the characters on its head to say, hey, we thought we were going to go to Planet X, get these riches, get what we wanted, and come back victorious because of us mapping a route to this planet, which we'll talk about Planet X in just a second. But the whole thing gets flipped and it's like, no, this is actually about, like you said, acceptance and family and overcoming loss and pushing through that loss, no matter how you feel it. And reuniting with family and finding out like what your new family can be, right? Like Felix reunites with his family, Sky reunites with their brother, and I thought there was going to be a little bit of tension and a tumultuous ending for both of them. But it's really this sort of heartfelt moment of we both miss dad. Maybe we can create family together without him and be together on this ship rather than you running away with me with my ship, you know, or it's our ship now. And I was like,
Right.
oh God, that's so heartwarming. I was like, I love that. I love that. Like, despite all the shit Sky put Helis through, and they just hugged it out, and they were just siblings together in that moment. Like, it was just so heartwarming. And then, you know, Das with his dad and figuring out he wants to be a prospector just like his dad. And that's what he wants to do that from there on out. So it was really like all of these great uplifting endings for each of the characters. And that's what I really want out of a middle grade book.
Yeah, I feel like I there could have been a lot more conflict with the characters' interpersonal relationships with one another. But I'm glad that like the book didn't end in that way. And I'm glad, you know, from Path of Deceit, I think we both thought that Felix was like a really interesting character, and that whole scene of Felix and his family being saved by Kevmo and you know, that being like a lingering feeling for Felix, you know, knowing that his family's alive because of a Jedi, and feeling some gratefulness for that, even though it's all kind of muddy because of the way that the Path's philosophy plays into his life. But like ultimately he and his family is alive because of him. And I think we really liked that scene and found that scene, to me, when I think about, you know, phase 2, that particular is a scene that really stands out. So I was excited to see Felix back. And I think that he was a really interesting choice to bring back because he seems to be a little bit older. I think he's 19. So a bit older than the rest of our company, and also is a parent. So he kind of is approaching it both as like a youthful figure and as somebody who is a leader figure as well. And so kind of gets to be that bridge, I think, in between our characters and in terms of their relationships with the members of the team. I don't know if that makes sense, but like,
Yeah.
you know, typically there's like a master in this situation, or they have like a leader, somebody who has more maturity or wisdom to kind of impart on them. And Felix kind of plays that role in this book, which I think is cool. So I like Felix back.
Yeah, I liked Felix back too as well. And I love that we circled back to Kevmo's Inc. and got our first mention of Kevmo since Path of Deceit. I liked that twist. Like you said, that like what a perfect character to bring back and be the sort of linchpin and connective tissue between the Path and the Jedi. Somebody who was saved by a Jedi. It's so incredible. And also, I believe Felix is like in a polyamorous relationship. So there's multiple parents, multiple kids. So that's cool. Just getting some different sorts of family dynamics within Star Wars was interesting as well.
Yeah.
And I love how we learned a little bit of backstory in terms of how they all came together to form that family unit. So not just like making Felix the Path villain, like he's the bad guy because he's part of the Path. Like the book really humanized him, and I feel like I got a good understanding of his motivations. And at times it felt like he was starting to really understand that the Path's way is not the only way, even though it's the way that he will continue following. But also above the Path is the need to protect his family. Like he's recognizing through this journey and through missing his family and the absence of his family, that family is actually the most important thing, not just the belief system of the Path and their mission, but really the family he cares for is number one above all else, which I think a lot of other Path members might not necessarily have that sort of prioritization. You know, they might think, oh, anything for the Path. And I wonder if maybe because he almost lost his family on Dalna, if maybe that kind of brought things into perspective for him, alongside now being, you know, kind of captive by Sky and Rooper and Das.
I think that taking Felix out of the Path and away from his family did allow him to kind of assess, as you mentioned, like his relationships and his world a little bit. And even if he continues following down a different path than, you know, the Jedi or Das or Sky, like I think he walks away with a stronger, wider, broader understanding of the world and what's important to him. And I think that that's right. Like taking him out of that space is, like I said, a very slight de-radicalization tactic, you know? like just surrounding him with a different worldview for a time, and humanizing the other people in that room, I think was really valuable, and for him to as well like have a neutral to happy ending in this book.
I did love that he was reunited with his family and that Rooper kept her word, right? Because I was worried, will Rooper stick up for Felix when it matters the most? Like, will she really stick firm to say, hey, don't bring him in as a prisoner. This is not somebody who, deserves that. This is somebody who just wanted to be back with their family. And I think too, the moment where when he does see his family, he says, this is Rooper. She is not an enemy. The Jedi are not our enemy. And, he holds out his hands and says, the Force will be free. And then she says, puts her hands in his palm and says, may the Force be with you. And ending on that note, it was just hopeful, right? That like, maybe we can coexist, right? Like we can coexist into the future. We know in phase 1, the elders of the path do exist. The remnants of the path of the open hand, essentially, like all that's left of them.
Yeah, who didn't become the Nile.
Right. Like, through Tromac and where Crix and Zine are brought up. And so I think the fact that they're still around shows that coexistence did last, even though, Tromac and his tribe don't believe the Force should be used. And I guess they still out Zine when she uses the Force in some ways, but it doesn't seem to be the path is not as much of a threat later on. They're not trying to actively kill Jedi,
Right. It seems like it's more of an internal way of living rather than an external way of living, if that makes sense.
Right. And maybe that's sort of what the ending is sort of foreshadowing, right? It's just saying like this could be a glimpse into what the future could look like in some ways, right? Like we acknowledge our existences together in this galaxy, but you're not my enemy necessarily.
Well, I think it really speaks to the idea of just like the theme of just understanding one another despite our differences on a human level. It's so easy, right, for us in the real world to point the finger and put a group of people together and be like them, right? Not us, them. And I think we see this in our everyday lives in so many different ways. And it's difficult to cross those divides at times, and sometimes for very valid reasons. But when we have the opportunity to learn from somebody who is different than us, in many sorts of ways, I think that's like what this book is teaching, is take that opportunity to learn and walk away with a better understanding. And I think that's a really, really great lesson, especially to teach young people in this world. This is like a scary world we live in right now. And it feels like, we're walking backwards in a lot of ways. And, the less we can do that and more we can reach out a hand to somebody else and an ear to somebody else. I think like that it's a great lesson to teach young people, especially those young people who are growing up on the internet and, who don't necessarily have. I'm sorry, I'm just talking about the real world right now, but like that's what these books are for 8 to 12-year-olds. Like this is the stories and the lessons that they're trying to impart. Especially as we grow up on the internet, and the internet, especially when you don't have a lot of wisdom on the internet. I don't mean that like I'm not trying to be like ageist or pejorative in that, but like, if you're just entering a space for a new time, you don't know who's a friend and who's a foe, or, who's less than honest or whatever. So I think it's really easy to fall into traps and to fall into holes that you do not want to get anywhere near, especially as a young person. Even over a decade ago when I was a very young person on the internet, I fell into those traps. So like, I think it's even worse for kids now is my point. And my point, connecting it back to the book, Sarah, okay, do the book thing, is that I think that this team cooperating in the way that they did, was a really gentle and kind lesson that I liked a lot from the book. Yeah.
I totally agree. I love the moment too, where Felix pulls Das out of the like goop. Out of the thing, he rescues him, and that was the moment where I was like, yes, we're gonna get a good ending for this character, like a sort of redemptive, hopeful, cheers to the future sort of ending. And I'm happy that panned out the way it did. So, you make a lot of great points, though. I think, well said.
I am somebody who will always tie it back to our real world and our current situation and just go off on that tangent for 20 minutes.
So we're talking a bit about characters, and I have some more thoughts on characters in this book, but I do want to jump over to, like, I guess the title itself, and that title being Planet X. Like, what is Planet X? What do we know about Planet X? And it does tie into a conversation featuring Rooper and Fel X as well. But we've seen, I mean, you and I were thinking for a while when we first heard Quest for Planet X way back when, we're like, okay, that's got to be Leveler Homeworld. Like that's got to be the one, right? Because we know,
you know what, you were thinking that, and I was going like, I don't know. I'm making fun of myself here right now, guys.
We knew in Eye of the Storm by Charles Soule, the comic, that Martian goes to this planet and he flies through this like crazy whirlwind of storms and all this crap. He gets to this really beautiful world. It's like a garden, and that's where he grabs some levelers and extracts them off the planet. And that's, you know, the rest is history for the Starlight Beacon. So we know that happens, right? And so when we start hearing about in this book, this place called Planet X, and it's sort of a myth in many ways. It almost feels like something that prospectors made up, who maybe when they actually did get to a Planet X of some sort, they were driven mad by either deep space or whatever, or maybe the length of the journey. And so they started making up these like fantastical stories about this like perfect utopia planet. And so in my mind, like when I started reading this, I'm like, okay, yeah, Planet X has to be that like beautiful, serene world that we know all about and have seen in comics previously.
It's got like the way you're describing it, like Garden of Eden energy.
Yeah.
Like, and it's talked about in this book as a nexus of the Force. So it does have that sort of spiritual Garden of Eden energy, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that's what Felix kind of gives a hint to Rooper when they're talking about the Leveler, and he's saying that the Leveler is an avatar of the Force, which is so interesting. That's the first time we've heard it referenced in that way. So fascinating. But him saying, you know, it is going to balance the Force. When you face the Leveler, you'll see the true nature of the Force and how devastating it can be. Felix says it's a planet made by the Force itself. So like the Force is sustaining this planet. It's alive. It is wants to keep people out, clearly, right? If it's so difficult to get to, it wants to be non-existent in some ways to prospectors.
If it does not exist in the archive, it does not exist.
Planet X is like, hey, I'm vibing over here. Stay in your lane, please.
Right.
But yeah, Rupert realizes it's a Force nexus, and we do get a little bit of history for it. I don't remember who says this, but it says, quote, "The story started with an early prospector named Xeris Patri, who claimed to have crashed there and barely made it out with a handful of riches, miraculously healed of his life-threatening injuries. The
this
riches
is super biblical.
Yeah, the riches had been unlike anything anyone had seen before, precious and beautiful." So like, not only is this a place full of riches and incredible resources that are going to be sold at a hefty price, I'm sure, it's treating injuries and healing people and giving, like, literally giving life, because the Force itself is life.
Yeah, I'm not going to go on like a 20-minute tangent about the Bible, but like it's absolutely giving biblical sort of energy. And then, you know, once you leave, you're not the same anymore, right? Like, so, you know, when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, they were sinners at that point, right? They had committed a sin, and that's why they were booted, right? Brad's like, oh my God, you're talking about the Bible on our Star Wars podcast. I can see it in your face.
I have a question, because I'm no Adam and Eve expert, but is the general gist of it like when they eat the forbidden fruit and they are excommunicado from the garden? Is that like why sin exists?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I like grew up going to church. I think this is true. I don't really do that anymore.
So we say the word sin. May I? #egg talk. May I? Because we know the sin done to the nameless.
Sin done to the nameless.
Right. So is the fact that this
bringing it back
is the fact that this original prospector Xeris Patri, like, who crashed there and took resources from that world, like took the forbidden fruit off the tree from the Garden of Eden, from Planet X. Like, is that why Was that the sin done to the Nameless was just the discovery of this planet, and that people could come in, take the resources and leave, and the planet's sort of poisoned by that act, that act of thievery, right? And it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And like maybe that's why the Force is balancing the way it is. That's why it's called the Leveler. It's why the Leveler is like an avatar of the Force, and the Force is saying, do not come back here by any means. Do not return.
Right. And if the leveler in at least in Felix's perspective is an avatar of the Force is a judgment on the Force. That's like a real godly sort of place to put the leveler.
Yeah.
Which we know like the leveler is like pretty destructive and awful and not so great. So like that's a really interesting perspective, and I don't really have any insight on that. But like I think it's interesting that like Felix is pretty explicitly saying like the leveler is judge, jury, and executioner on the Force, and face the leveler and you'll find out.
Well, that's what Felix tells Rooper when talking about Kevmo.
And I quote, face the leveler and you'll find out.
And I quote, he saved my children's lives and that of my partner. The galaxy would be better with Kevmo Zinc alive and doing as you say, saving people. But the Force did not will it. The leveler took him, judged him, and he is dead. In the presence of the leveler, there is no saving Jedi.
You know what? I take it back. Maybe I will go on a 20-minute rant about the Bible, the Bible and its connections in here. Because
but this is good though. You're right.
I do think
it's the Garden of Eden. I think it's exactly that. Yeah.
Or a Garden of Eden-esque sort of place, at least in the mind of the Path, but also perhaps in the ways of the Force and tipping that balance, especially with the levelers.
And prospectors, they know it is striking gold. Well, if you get here,
I'm speaking like. Yes, but I'm also speaking like just the Force as an entity.
Gotcha, as a living, breathing thing. Yeah,
right. And we don't know the leveler's effect on the Force as a whole. We just know what effect they can create with the Force. But I just, when you were talking, Kevmo Zinc, I realized, I recalled, if you will, I'm standing up, I'm holding my microphone. If there's crappy audio, sorry, Brad. But that's
sounds good
why.
to me.
It means
Egg Talk gets serious. You got to stand up.
Egg Talk is serious. And not only that, but guys, Path of Deceit was a book about religious cults. Okay. It's all coming around. If Path of Deceit is about a book about religious cults, aka the Path of the Open Hand, and here we are talking about Planet X, this Force Nexus place. It's a paradise. It's got riches, and it's got these magical Force beings that can manipulate the Force in the ways that nobody else can. And, and the Path of the Open Hand is a religious cult, and they view it in this way. You can throw the Bible in here. I really did not expect to say the word Bible in this episode, but here we are.
Look at us talking Star Wars, Bible. It feels natural.
I feel like I need to like crack open a Bible and like read some verses and then like get the story back down in order to come back and talk about it. It's been a couple years. But yeah, wow. It's really just all happening in my brain right now. I'm flipping through the file folders again. But yeah, this is let's put a pin in this and let's fast forward to our whatever happens in Path of, gosh, my brain is so jumbled. Path of Vengeance. The other
we will have a lot
to read.
To talk.
I feel like we're going to get into the weeds. Yeah, I feel like we're going to get into weeds there. So
we'll hold some of it. I think the one thing I will leave off on with Egg Talk before we turn it over to some new things is what Rooper hears about the Leveler and kind of what's going on Jeddah, and how there's rumblings and there's this unknown creature at the center of it. And this ties back to Quest for the Hidden City. So Rupert thinks to herself, Rooper had faced monsters before, the poor corrupted catacoots on Gloam who'd attacked Doss and his father, along with anyone else who had gotten in their way. It hadn't been their fault, but Rooper had still needed to fight them. She couldn't help wonder if this unknown creature on Jeddah was similar. Maybe it only wanted something nobody knew how to give it.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So I really want to hit that point because I don't necessarily, this sort of thing is kind of alluded to in Path of Vengeance, and we'll get to that, but I really love the way that this is worded here because it is presenting the leveler as a misunderstood creature, as maybe a creature who is actually trying to give a cry for help in some ways, like the Catacoot in Quest for Hidden City, right? The Catacoot became vampires. They were the monsters themselves. They needed the antidote to stop the poison from their lungs, turning them into these creatures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so interesting that now it's like kind of all tying together and saying, hey, maybe the levelers just want to be returned to their home planet. Maybe it's that simple. You know, you extract something from somewhere that it's meant to be, and you try to use it for your own gain. And what happens? The force starts to imbalance across the galaxy, right? The Path thinks that the force is thrown out of balance because the Jedi are using it. No, it's because the leveler and this world is fighting back because it is not the natural way. And I think that's what the leveler is trying to communicate, much like the Catacoot in Quest for Hidden City. Anyways, last point I wanted to make there, but did you have any thoughts on that? Because I love that whole paragraph from Rooper.
I tapped that as well. It sounded like a monster. And I think that maybe it only wanted something no one knew how to give it, right? The sin done to the nameless. And I'm not necessarily suspecting at this point anymore that it was anything that any of the Jedi or the people that we know that did the same sin done to the nameless. I think it is a generations old sort of a thing, right? And so like, how can you fix something that you didn't break? How do you go about fixing a situation that you didn't break and you didn't know the mechanisms of necessarily how it broke, but it's broken? So I think we're there. But I also like, as you were talking, I was like, oh my gosh, we're once again back in our books for young people era talking about environmentalism, resource use, colonialization. And I'm like, wow, go listen to our Obi-Wan Padawan book conversation, because I talked about all of those things a lot there. But you were talking about that, and if the sin done to the nameless was taking them from their home and using them in ways of destruction, like that is you know, and we talk, okay, and then we talk about the phase 1 of the High Republic, which, you know, we can talk a lot about whether the Republic's aims to expand and bring more people into the Republic is like a good thing, or colonialization, and like its merits and detractors. And I think we're walking towards that conversation with the leveler here, which is, I'm not sure how much I've thought about that in this way before.
I am having the exact same thought. Like you are saying the things that I'm thinking, and I'm like, oh my God, our brain cell is firing on all cylinders right now. Cell. Because now I'm thinking, like, is it the Republic? Is it me? The Republic? Am I the drama? Am I the drama? Right? Because the sort of like capitalist manifest destiny attitude of the Republic to say, we got to go chart hyperspace lanes. Like we need to figure it out. We need to expand as far as we can and bring more planets. And like, what are the unintended consequences of that? It's that you find a planet like Planet X that is sort of a Pandora's box, and you think, yeah, what's in the box? It's just some cool resources that I can extract. And when you open that box, you're like, shit, it's Pandora's box actually. And there are a lot of bad things in here that I cannot put back in the box.
And not only that, so like, it's one thing I maybe to, you know, chart and map and have ways of connection between one another, right? Like, I think that's all broadly good natured if you approach that in the right way. If you want to connect with other people and bring people together, yada, yada, yada. I don't think that is bad necessarily. However, what do the graphs and the Santecos like to do? Say it with me. 1, 2, 3. Privatization.
Prospects. Yeah. That is a key component of this book that is talked about. You want to privatization of lanes? Yeah.
Actually, this is maybe a good transition over into the hyperspace chase as a thing. But like this whole plot, the plot kicks off with our characters going on an adventure in an organized sort of fashion to chart hyperspace lanes for money that will ultimately be privatized and then sold So like it's a whole, instead of it being a sort of altruistic connective tissue, bringing people and cultures together sort of a situation, it's like a who can do it fastest, who can do it best to get money. So the big guys, the Santecas and the Graphs, can ultimately get money.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's like exploitation of the little guy. It's just like capitalism.
She's still standing. For the record, she's still standing. She has not sat down since Egg Talk began and ended. We are now into
I'm
hyperspace
going on a path
prospecting
of,
talk.
I'm going on a path of like eminent domain is bad, but also like there's no but on that. Eminent domain is bad. My point being the CEOs are bad. That's where I'm
yeah.
That's where I'm headed towards, in the sense that like, it's a bunch of the grunt people ultimately hurting one another, right? Mm-hmm. They're in competition with one another in a false competition because they're not the winners. The CEOs are the winners.
The Graphs and the Santecas are, yes, so completely. They're the ones who benefit from it.
That's where I'm going on that.
Yeah.
I feel like I was headed down a different direction. I was like, wait a second, that's not what I'm trying to say.
It is fascinating. And like, she's sort of seeing hyperspace lanes as like a shared commodity that should be for everybody, which I think is a good thing, right? Because and Sky makes a point too to say, well, under the Republic, I guarantee you not as many hyperspace lanes would have been found. Like the Graphs and the Santecas, even though we're warring, like we have been leading the charge to map those out. But like, is that a good thing?
It's complicated, isn't it? Right? Like this is a conversation I have with somebody in my life a bit. But it's like, well, if the private industry didn't go for the innovation on here, who would have gone for the innovation? Right. And it's like, okay, well, I can see that. Right. But there still should be regulation on that. There still should be an angling towards the greater good and the good of people.
Well, it's like monopoly versus competition. Like competition is healthy for a marketplace. Competition drives like the innovation you're talking about. It drives good
Brad
products.
holds an economics degree.
Yeah, let me talk about economics. Finally, I've been waiting for this day all freaking podcast.
Wow, where is this episode going? We're having a good time though.
Quality product, good innovative products, consumer wins. Hell yeah, we win under a competitive market. When it's a monopoly, when it's just the Graphs, when it's just the Santecas, when it's just Google or owning the search engine, like that, those sorts of things, right? Bad things start to happen. The consumer loses, the people lose, the everyday grunts, as you call them, are losing in a galaxy far, far away. The ones who are actually participating in this race to map these lanes are losing, etc. Really happy I could put that economics degree to use. Yeah. Take that one, Dad. I told you I'd do it one day.
Did your dad, was he disappointed in you for getting an economics degree? Because I feel like, there are some people in my life that would have been like, are you going to get a useful degree or a useless degree? And I would always tell that person a useless degree. And what about it? But an economics degree would have been one that person would have been proud of. I am vamping because I was trying to find the name of, that makes me want to bring up the Bind Guild.
Oh. Bring it back to Affy Hollow. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Because like
phase one little here connection here.
Well, yeah. Well, I was just talking about like the exploitation of the lower people, the everyday people who get themselves within the Bind Guild, with what they were gotten like contracts that were really, really unfair, and they were ultimately being used. And I don't remember the specifics on this. I'm really sorry about that. All I remember is if you split the force into two, and it is violence.
Oh, here we go. Put $1 in the jar. Tomac Vita's quote.
But yeah, and then at the end she like brings that down because she realizes that the Bind Guild and what I can't think of the woman's name. I'm so sorry. I know
who you're talking about. Like the woman who kind of runs it, and
yeah, like her mother figure.
Because her parents died running a mission for the Bind Guild.
This is the point I'm trying to make. Okay, that's literally exactly the point I'm trying to make. Anyway, and for what? And for what?
Yeah.
Thank you. Worker rights, worker protections. Big bad Graphs and Santecas living in their big tall towers with their big money, and this is This is me being mad about what's his name in Graph, Mr. F-Boy.
Xylan Graph, yes, from Out of the Shadows.
We've read too many of these books.
Starting to mush together.
I don't even know who's who anymore. I mean, I do, but like I just can't remember any names anymore.
Yeah, it is horrifying to think about. Like as much as the Republic's mission to be interconnected with other planets across the galaxy, as that happens, the exploitation it is a linear line. It is a line. It is just a straight line up to the right. You know, it's like
it's complicated.
Globalization happens and exploitation continues with it, like on a 1-to-1 scale almost. And
the answer is not no globalization or like, you know, no galaxy wide expansion, because ultimately, like, again, I'm gonna go back to like the ultimate goal of like bringing cultures together and cooperation and you know, sharing of resources.
The Republic Fair being an example of like, hey, look, we can do this together. Really, you know,
I think valuable human principles, things that we want to strive towards, things that we want to connect under. And at the same time, you know, moving really fast can create gaps in safety and protections. And when we're not thinking about, you know, all of the possibilities, some of those possibilities get missed, I guess. I don't know where I'm going with this. I don't know if I'm saying what I mean to say, but I'm trying.
Yeah, you are. And I will add to that and say that's why characters like Affie Hollow are fantastic, because it's sort of that reality check of like, hey, we should not do this actually, and I'm going to be the one to say it. I would love, you know, we've sometimes asked authors like, hey, what 2 Star Wars characters do you want to have a dinner or like, you know, get a drink and talk? I want to see Affie Hollow and Rooper Natani in a room together talk about like the Republic and like the Republic's great works and Lena So and her vision. Like I want to see like 2 characters 150 years apart talk it out. Here's where the Republic was. Here's where it's gotten to. How do we feel about that? I want to see those 2 characters talk.
Yes, I agree.
I think
that would be really, really interesting.
I can't wait to reunite with Affie Hollow very soon. It is. We are very close to Tales of Light and Life. We are very, very close.
Oh my gosh. I don't want to say I forgot about it because I didn't, but like I had forgotten that it was so close. It's what, next month? July?
Tales of Light and Life got moved up into August. I think it comes out August 29th.
Okay.
Which is also Remembering Resistance Day for those of you out there.
Get ready.
More on that soon.
Yes, we will be hosting again, of course. Anyway.
Well, we talked quite a bit about prospecting and privatization of hyperspace lanes. I do want to actually mention one thing here, though, real quick about prospecting, which this is, I believe, from Sky. Sky says this, quote, for regular prospecting, we use old-fashioned star maps to make very short jumps that we're pretty certain have no occlusions, something that interrupts hyperspace. An obstacle, like the gravity around a planet or an asteroid field. As we make little jumps, we leave little beacons behind like breadcrumbs. If we go to an obstacle, we go around it, marking the way. When we find an endpoint, like an inhabited planet or a moon, then we link the beacon, register the route from where we started to and where we ended. Then we sell the route to somebody who will lay out a more sophisticated beacon network. And there you have an official hyperspace lane. So this is just a description of how prospecting actually works in a galaxy far, far away. But I want to hone in on the word occlusion, which Sky says is something that interrupts hyperspace. And it makes me think of Lydia Kang's upcoming short serialized fiction, which is going to be featured in Star Wars Insider.
That's not what I thought you were going to bring up.
Chronicles from the Occlusion Zone.
Oh.
And if we think about occlusion being something that interrupts hyperspace travel, what does it mean to be like from the occlusion zone? Are like the Nile kind of like pocketing themselves inside these places that are occlusions and that's where they operate from? It's just interesting to me to think about. So we'll find out more when we get those stories. But I thought that was that word. I kind of connected the dots a little bit.
Also, I mean, just that phrasing or I guess the whole description of prospecting also made me think of what I thought you were going to bring up, is that thing that may or may not have happened at after chapter 1 of Light of the Jedi, which was kind of bad and was like a disruption to the hyperspace lane. It was the great hyperspace disaster, guys. Something got into the hyperspace lane, destruction, bad. You could call that an occlusion, if you will.
I have an odds and ends on that. Can I bring it up now, actually?
Do it. Odds and ends days every day.
It's Rooper when they go into hyperspace and she thinks to herself, quote, "A relieved silence filled the cockpit. They were safe in hyperspace. Nobody really knew what hyperspace was exactly, other than a different plane of space. From outside, it couldn't be changed or affected by people, only by objects and forces that affected all space. So nobody could hurt them as long as their coordinates and beacons were good." Okay, you thought. Anyways, I just thought that was like a funny, like, if you know, you know moment of like,
that's some like real pained laughter, right?
It's
there.
like the Always Sunny cut to like the black screen with the white font, and it's like the gang was affected by hyperspace, or like the gang was attacked in hyperspace. Actually, this episode of Always Sunny. Anyways, just wanted to bring that one up.
Ouch! Thanks, Brad, for pain.
Can we talk a little bit about Skygraph, our newest NB friend in Star Wars?
Yeah, of course we can. Let's do it.
What did you think of Sky, as well as like the things that motivate them, the loss of the father, the brother chasing after them, etc.? Like, what did you think of this character, and was it a character that connected with you in any way?
I thought Sky was a great addition to this team and just like a really interesting character to include in this story. First of all, I think we would absolutely be remiss if we did not, mention the really valuable representation that Sky is providing for especially young people, especially right now. So to have like a trans NB character who I think canonically wears binders and, is just living their most authentic self in this book, I think is really, 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 really valuable. And secondly, who among us does not have a complicated relationship with their brother? No, I love my brother. Adam, if you're listening to this, which he's not, love you, bestie. But we're very different. Anyway, I just thought that Sky's character, as someone who is trying to really cement themselves as a young person and trying to pave their own path, despite, grief and trauma that they're dealing with, despite, feeling perhaps in the shadow of their brother, feeling like they're at competition with each other. I think that that's really common. And that's why I really liked the ending for Sky and for, these siblings and the really kind of hopeful together future that they have ahead of them. But yeah, I just thought that Sky was really interesting and provided a great perspective and ultimately is like great representation and just a good inclusion in the Star Wars.
Absolutely. And also having Tessa Gratton, who is non-binary, writing this character and introducing them to us, I think is wonderful, and also just shows the value of getting diversified voices within Star Wars publishing and like why we need a push for that, because for so long, I think science fiction books and
fantasy
Star Wars,
too.
Fantasy
and everything,
a lot of things were very much one way, like white male driven, etc. And so I think publishing has done such a good job of just bringing in new voices. Like Star Wars has been making so many leaps in the publishing space. And I will continue to say, I hope the films and a TV continue to be representative of that. And I think hopefully some of the upcoming projects that have the capacity to do that. But Sky was so cool. And like you said, just in the times that we're living right now with like a, sweeping anti-LGBTQIA plus legislation just tearing the country apart and having the worst sorts of things imaginable happen in this country. I think just again, like the importance of like seeing ourselves in this story, it's a silver lining where we can take it, especially for trans and non-binary youth who are being affected by all this change that's happening for the worse.
Yeah, I a full agreement there. And I think that especially for young kids, youth is such a vulnerable time. Mm-hmm. For us to be forming our identities, for us to be finding ourselves, to be making mistakes, to be trying new things, like all of these things, right? Like that's what youth is growing and learning. But having representation in all sorts of different forms is great. And then having representation in a galaxy far, far away for young people not only allows young people to see themselves, but also allows young people to see themselves in a galaxy far, far away, which, if we go back to the original Star Wars, much love to the classic Star Wars, like it's what brought us here. But, it's a very white male centered and executed story. If you go back to the OT, there's only like 4 women that speak throughout the entirety of the original trilogy. So like, that's just like a thing. And I really appreciate publishing for continuing to make strides on this. And I hope that, continues, because it's really valuable and everybody deserves to be seen and everybody deserves to see others and authentically and complexly. And anyway, yeah, I think the rest of publishing still has a lot of work to do to catch up, but I at least think that Star Wars is doing pretty decently. And I'm really grateful for Star Wars authors for not only, like Tessa bringing themselves and like, their identity to characters in Star Wars, but also for people who don't, who are cishet, who don't identify as LGBTQ or, don't necessarily have the most diverse background as a person, like always striving to bring in characters from different backgrounds and I think that's really valuable for those that maybe don't see that in their day-to-day life to get a broader experience of the world, but also for those who really, really need that representation for themselves. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox about that, but I do think it's really important. And I'm really grateful for Star Wars for it, especially within the High Republic.
Perfectly said. I can't add anything else to what you mentioned there, but I just love Sky. I love the relationship with their father. A couple of details here. They mention how their dad taught them to make educated guesses, how to confirm hypotheses, make up memory games to recall complex algorithms, how to tell if a plant needed watering, and the difference between being important. Angry because they were hungry and angry because someone disrespected them, which I want to specifically mention that because, I can relate, Skygraph. I can relate.
Do you know the difference between your hangriness and your anger caused by disrespect?
Yeah, I think I have a pretty good grasp on that. Although there are some situations where you're like, oh,
you eat your Snickers and you're like, oh, I think that like it's clear that Sky's dad is a really important person to them and like continues to be a really important person in the sense that they're trying to find closure on that relationship by trying to find him. I think that that's really easy to empathize with and to understand. A loving, caring relationship with a loved one that, you respect and you don't have closure on. There's all things in our lives that like we don't have closure on and that still sting. So I think that that's easy to empathize with.
But I think we can end on this quote from Helis and Sky towards the end of the book. Helis quotes this old hyperspace prospector saying that I think their dad quoted pretty often. And he says, if dad could, he'd have come home. Like they say, if you can't go forward, go back to where you started. And then Sky murmurs, always return home. That's how their dad interpreted it. But he hadn't meant Thelge or Coruscant. He had meant family. And then Sky, they said, the Brightbird seems like a nice place for a home. And I think that's like a great place to end on, the idea that like home truly is where the heart is, and this whole book being about so focused on a destination that isn't home and then missing the home that's actually around you, right? Like Sky is so focused on Planet X and bringing dad home that they don't actually recognize the fact that the brother can be home moving forward. Or,
and that like they don't get to that destination. The destination is something else entirely. Or the destination isn't as important. I mean, that's what I think what you're getting at. The destination isn't as important as the people around you.
And just tying into Star Wars' ideas of found family and just the importance of found family overall in any story, and how, Helis is literally their brother, but found family in a sense that Sky finds that the brother can't be family again, finds that realization. it's always been buried. It just needed to come to the surface to be fully realized at this point in their life. And for many of our other characters, like finding their identity and finding their purpose in this galaxy. Rooper trusting the Force, telling Salandra she wants to be the Shield. Can you teach me how to be the Shield? That's what I want to do. I feel comfortable as the Shield. And Das finding his purpose. And I just, again, this is why the middle grade books in Star Wars are so wonderful, because they're just so heartfelt and cozy to read, and nobody ever dies in
courage,
these.
Though. Test of courage like hurt my emotions.
Test of courage was pretty dark.
Sorry, it really was a test of courage, and my courage, to be specific.
Yeah, I feel like Justina's gonna hit us in the hearts again with a valiant vow.
Don't say that.
Her final book.
Don't say that. I'm fragile. But no, I agree with you in the sense that like these books are, they're gentle, and they are, sharing with us emotions and perspectives and valuable life lessons in accessible and fun ways. And like, as we all know, I love Race to Crash Point Tower. So, I feel very strongly about, these books in general, even if not every single one of them is my personal favorite. I think the middle grades are so, so valuable.
Well, Sarah, do you have any final thoughts on Quest for Planet X before we wrap things up here?
Book good. We enjoyed. I always get more out of talking about these books as well. Really didn't expect to be bringing up the Bible in this one, but makes sense. Religious cults, in terms of like in the Star Wars universe. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing, where some of the seeds that were planted in this book come to fruition in Path of Vengeance, which is going to be totally different. And I hope that we see more of these characters in the future. I know like we're going to be past phase 2 very shortly and back with our characters from phase 1. But I hope that both the characters from phase 1 and those from phase 2 ultimately show up in other stories and continue to have stories told about them, because I don't think their capacity for sharing, life lessons with us is over at this point. I think we've got more to share.
I really enjoyed this book. I'm happy to have Tessa as part of the High Republic family, and I can't wait for the next book. I'm so excited. Phase 3 is just around the corner. Oh my gosh. We're going to be getting news. That to me, Brad. We're going to be getting news in like a month at San Diego Comic-Con. Like we might get some book covers.
I am unprepared. I need it like it was yesterday, but also like I'm so unprepared.
Yeah. You mentioned the things that maybe popped up in this book, potentially bubbling back to the surface later on. I don't have many odds and ends. I mentioned one up front, but the one I did want to mention is the compass that Sky builds, the resonator, how it uses supraluminite tracing. So basically an object that is maybe from a point or place in the galaxy, using that object, and this machine resonates with it to lead the path. Right. And they keep trying to use this machine to say, hey, we got Das. Das was at Planet X at one point. Let's use him as the object to trace our way to Planet X. And it ends up bringing them back to Gloam, unfortunately. But Rooper makes a point to say, that can't work. That's not how the Force works. Like the Force does connect everything in the galaxy, but you can't use it to like one specific frequency, and there's nothing on record that states that's possible. And it made me start thinking of like wayfinders and like hyperspace tracking, which is a technology that will eventually get created by the Empire. And also the paths, Marie Santeca, like her path that she holds in her head, and she passes those on to Vernestra Rowe. And so I wonder, in the day and age of like phase 1 and phase 3, did Sky Graf, who came up with this compass, did the Grafs ever perfect it? Did they ever really fully idealize this technology? And could that technology help Vernestra get to Planet X with the knowledge of the paths that Marie Santeca provided to her? Or does she already have the path to Planet X to bring the levelers back to their home planet and cleanse the sin done to the Nameless?
Vernestra is the key to all of this.
No, she really is actually like so important.
And we know she's alive in the Acolyte, which oh my gosh. I was thinking earlier today about like potential Acolyte connections to the High Republic and us freaking out about that. I was just having a wow, what if thought. Anyway, was there a comment in this book, and I apologize because I did not take a lot of notes because I was kind of going through the audiobook. Was there a comment made by Rooper about meditating, or the way that hyperspace felt? I mean, like, kind of felt like a different plane. Because the reason why I kind of bring up that idea is because we know that Verdestra like gets her visions in hyperspace, and also, can't she like see the paths in hyperspace? Isn't that part of the whole problem, if I recall correctly?
Well, Vernestra has like visions of the future, maybe the past, maybe the present. She can't quite pinpoint it when she's in hyperspace. Right. It like kind of attacks her all at once. But Maria Santeca actually gave her, touched her through the glass or whatever, or touched her hand, and then all of a sudden she's like, I see a planet, or I see something at the edge of space that I need to get to, or whatever. And like she doesn't really know what it is, but I think it's Planet X.
But my point being, I think that it's interesting that like the hyperspace seems to be like a different plane of existence, and the way that it affects people when they're in hyperspace, or can affect people when they're in hyperspace. Other than that, we've really talked about all of the things that I made notes about in this. And I think you and I both grabbed some of the same key points, which like, wow, our brain cell was really going for it. God bless.
That's why we do this podcast. Isn't it wonderful?
I don't know if I have any other like odds and ends sorts of things here at this point. Wow. You know, when we've been, hold on. Oh, we're at an hour 24. That's why I'm saying odds and ends and thingsies.
We're past the hour 15. The delusion has begun.
That's right. I mean, although I've been a little crazy this whole time, you guys missed it because this is an audio only podcast, but I stood up and then I put my standing desk up to standing desk height, and then I stood on a chair. So it didn't. Yeah, it's been chaotic. I'm really sorry.
Well, that seems to be all for us on this episode of Friends of the Force, another High Republic book in the books. And we have one more. Path of Vengeance is coming up next. We are making our way through that, so it will be out in the coming weeks, so stay tuned. That'll be a very fun episode, and there will be plenty more egg talk. I'm glad we could fit egg talk into all 3 book discussions for this wave of books. It felt right.
We never named a series, it's just all like the main show at this point, but like maybe we should just like officially name the series Egg Talk. I don't know. I just want to throw it out there. People would be confused, but like the ones who know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's not a bad idea, but maybe I can make a graphic at least. At the very least, I should make a graphic for Egg Talk. I'll make a graphic for Egg Talk. If not officially naming this Egg Talk, I will make or maybe I can make like an audio effect. I can find out.
You should know both.
I'll work on it. I'll workshop it a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm off work tomorrow. I think I know what I'm doing.
Both.
That's all for this episode, everybody. As I mentioned up front, follow us on all of our socials so you know when our episodes are coming out, because we got some fun things planned this summer that you don't want to miss. And well into the fall, our High Republic coverage will continue. So we are dedicated to covering these books. It is a sort of project for us to bring you these discussions and chronicle our experience reading these books in real time. And it's fun. It's fun to do that. In this way. And I feel like, as you said, I walk away from all these discussions being like, wow, I feel like I have a really firm understanding of what I read, versus in the past, I would just read books and kind of, they recede from my mind. So this is fun. I'm glad we did this once again. So thank you, Sarah. And thank you, listener, for joining.
Me too. And that's the transition I was going to make, Brad. But no, thank you so much for continuing to join us on our High Republic book conversations and our episodes beyond the High Republic. If you listen, we are very, very grateful. We are especially grateful for our patrons who help make the show happen. Seriously, we could not do it without them. And we're very, very grateful for their support of the show. Patreon is the only place you'll hear us talk about comics. Yes, we talk about comics. We haven't done one in a little bit. I've been a little bit behind, but I'm catching up. I'm catching up, and we're going to be talking about some High Republic Phase 2 comics in the coming weeks. So if you're interested in that, that will be there. And so thank you to our patrons, Ben, Brian, Cheryl Clay, Deborah, Dylan, D. Sizzle, Emma Huang, Jennifer, Katie, Knights of Ren, Leanne, Levi, Lucy, Lindsay, Matthew, Rob, Saber Bouquet, Santa, Sky Talker, Stephen, Tom, and Travis. We are very, very grateful for you. And again, to everyone who listened today, I hope that you are hydrated and well and healthy and happy. Thanks for listening.
Stay hydrated indeed. You never know when you might need to be ready for a quest to Planet X. Thank you all for listening. And until next time, may the Force be with you always.